This is the first week where actually it was brought up last week that we wanted to, there was some indication of an interest in starting to record these sessions. So today is the first week that we are now actually recording the sessions, which is good because we're still at the very beginning of the book. And we're going to find a way to make that available for anybody that wants to look at it later or, work with new people with it or whatever it is that you have an interest in doing. So again, this is the first week that we're doing that. Now, last week we started the beginning of the book again, because we went to, what did we say? The program of recovery, the description thereof is in the first 196 pages, 32 in the Roman, 164. So in this meeting, we cycle through that. We start at the very beginning, we go through the Roman, we go all the way through the Arabic numbers until we hit 164. And what happens when we hit 164? We start back over again. So this is the first cycling that we've done at this group. Took about what we say, like 11 months roughly to get through it. So if what I want to say is, if you have any questions, normally I think it's even in the reading. Like if you have any questions, there'll be time, I think we say at the end of the meeting for questions and answers. But I'm going to tell you, if you have a question or something that we're reading doesn't make sense, you want clarification, whatever, just raise your hand. Let's just discuss it now. Get it out there so that we all have clarification, because we're trying to study this. We heard that this is a textbook. You got to study, learn, take action. If we can't get that first piece down of studying it, we are not going to learn it. So we want to make sure that we all understand what we're going through here. So we're in forward to second edition right now. And if you would turn to page XVII, which is 17 in the Roman. I didn't know Romans until I started studying this book. I had to convert letters to numbers. That was a little difficult, but after a while it gets pretty simple to do. And forward to second edition starts on page XV. And just to kind of recap a little bit, we went through forward to first edition, that first paragraph, but in forward to second edition, there's a lot of important information in there, especially when we get into what amounts to basically the history of how this whole deal got going. I mean, we learned on the title page what AA is, right? It's basically the how-to, the directions of how a bunch of people recovered. So if you come to AA and you're interested in that, you're interested in getting well, learning how these guys recovered, that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is. That's what we do in the groups. We study. We're studying this book to learn how to do that. Now, on the bottom of page XV is where this kind of kicks off, telling us how this whole thing got started and how it worked. And the last line on page XV basically summarizes how this whole thing works. And it says the broker, they're talking about Bill Wilson, who was AA number 1. It says he had been relieved of his drink obsession. Obsession is something that occurs in the mind, right? He was relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience. He was sick. He was suffering from a condition of the mind. It's this drink obsession. Couldn't stop. Couldn't control the amount he took either. And it says that he was relieved of that. That's becoming recovered. How was he relieved of it? It tells us a solution just in that sentence. He had a spiritual experience. That's what AA has to offer. Directions on how to have a spiritual experience that can relieve your drink obsession. And it goes into, on page XVI, talking about the 6 things that Bill had to do, which actually amounts to 7, that he put together as a program of recovery. Back then, and actually all the way up until the time that this book was written, there were not 12 steps. There were 6 things these guys were doing. And it talks about that if you drop down 8 lines on page XVI, this is a little recap, and I would highly recommend underlining and highlighting this for when you go through this with a newcomer. This is important information. Bill was relieved of his drink obsession. How? It says, here, though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford group. Okay, so the Oxford group were a bunch of groups that were throughout the U.S. and in Europe that were trying to practice first century Christianity to the best of their ability to live a better life. We're in Alcoholics, but what happened was is somebody prior to Bill and somebody prior to him got in touch with this Oxford group, and they were an alcoholic. They were deemed hopeless, just like Bill was. Bill went to Dr. Silkworth. He was deemed hopeless. Nothing we can do for you, said the medical community. Tried quitting himself, and he just realized he's hopeless. He's going to die this way, right? But this guy ended up going to this Oxford group, and he got some of these ideas and principles that these guys were practicing, and the guy recovered and passed it on to what turned out to be one of Bill's good drinking buddies, who was Ebby Thatcher. And Ebby Thatcher came to Bill and expressed what he was doing and how he got well. And so Bill took it on, but he said he couldn't accept everything that Ebby was doing with this Oxford, but he was convinced of 6 things that were needed to recover. And it says here, the first thing, he was convinced of the need of moral inventory. He was convinced of the need of confession of personality defects. He was convinced of the need of restitution to those harmed. He was convinced of the need of helpfulness to others. And the last 2, he was convinced of the necessity. Necessity is kind of code word for must. He was convinced that it was necessary to have a belief in God, and he was convinced that it was necessary to depend upon that God. Those were the 6 things that Bill put into place, and it says that he had recovered. Then when we get to the bottom of page XVI, we turn around and see, we see when one thing that Bill had realized, it says just a couple sentences up from that last paragraph, he said he suddenly realized that in order to save himself, even though he'd recovered, he found out that he could go back to that state. See, he realized right away, there's a big difference between recovered and cured. Recovered, as it was mentioned earlier, is to be returned to a normal state of health after suffering from an illness. To be returned to a normal state of health, okay? Doesn't mean you can't go back to that old state of health, right? Cured is, it's done. This is not a done deal. And he was convinced that he had to pass this on to somebody else, so he found somebody who wound up being AA number 2, and that was Dr. Bob. And it says at the bottom of the page, the physician, Dr. Bob, Bill went to him and said, hey, you know what? He sat down with him at his house and talked with him and explained everything he knew about drinking, talked about his own drinking. We'll read about this a little later. And Dr. Bob immediately identified, yeah, I drank just like that. Yeah, I did that. And then he got into how many times he tried quitting. Yeah, I did the same thing. He knew he was hopeless, couldn't do it. And then finally, so what did you do? How did you get what did you do? And so he told him, well, I had a spiritual experience. I got with this group, it's called the Oxford group. And I took some of their principles, spiritual principles, and made it a way of living for me. And I got well. And what does it say? What did the physician say? He'd already repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. He said, you know what? I'm already a member of the Oxford group. And here in Akron. And I tried those things. So his hope was diminished. It's great that it worked for you, but obviously didn't work for me. So why didn't it work for him? He's doing all these things, but why did it not work? The next sentence says, but when Bill gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, that's when the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. And he sobered never to drink again to the moment of his death in 1950. Saying is, he wasn't able to put this stuff into practice. Even though he tried these spiritual remedies, he tried all sorts of things, as well as trying to control it himself. He had no, but when Bill sat down, just like Dr. Silkworth sat down with Bill and said, man, this is a hospital. I am the head guy here. And I have seen many alcoholics come and go. I've seen many of your type. And your type is the type that's hopeless. There's nothing we've been able to do to be able to remedy this problem with people of your description, these true alcoholics. Nothing we can do. It's a hopeless condition, Bill. You're going to die that way. He told him, you're hopeless. Says when Bill told Dr. Bob exactly what Dr. Silkworth told him about this hopelessness, it kind of snuffed out any flicker of hope that I'm going to be able to do this by myself. He knew and he believed it. There's nothing I can, this is the only way. So now instead of scattered here, there, he said that he had a willingness and a desire and he applied these principles, and it says that then he was able to recover. Essentially, what are they saying? You can do all of this other stuff, but without that first step, for him, Dr. Bob didn't do any good. He could do the moral inventory, try to, all this stuff, helpfulness to others, try to be a better person, confession of defects, all that stuff. And it didn't help him until he learned that he was hopeless. Because then we're not just piecemealing this. He made it a way of life. This is a new way of living. I'm going to live this way every day. I'm not just going to go through this 1 through 12 and be done. He made it a way of living because he learned that that is the only hope that he had. That was essential for Dr. Bob. The key in that is that was essential for him to be able to recover, is learn he was hopeless. Now, that was also essential for Bill Wilson, because at the top of the page, when I started reading those 6 things that he was convinced of, if you read the sentence before that, it says, from this doctor, it's talking about when Bill met with Dr. Stokeworth, said Bill learned the grave nature of alcoholism. He needed to understand that he was hopeless before he would put these principles into practice in his life. Wouldn't have worked otherwise. Didn't work with Dr. Bob otherwise. That information that he got from Dr. Stokeworth was key for both of them to be able to have the foundation to be able to put this into place. And luckily, when these guys decided to write down what they did and put the directions in this book, once we get past the 4s, what's the first thing we're going to hit? It's called the doctor's opinion. The doctor's opinion is 7 1/4 pages. And you know what it tells us? In the doctor's own words, we're going to learn exactly what he told Bill. This is not information that came from Dr. Stokeworth, was passed to Bill. Bill changed it a little, talking to Dr. Bob. You know how us alcoholics are. We're going to change it, embellish it, and whatever. And by now, what do you think this would look like 80-some years later? What do you think a doctor's opinion would look like? Probably be all but forgotten. But they took his words. They said, here, we want you to write this. We don't even want to write it. Even when you talk, we don't want to miss anything. We want you to write it so that the readers, we can get exactly what they got. They found it that necessary. So if there's anything in the forward to second edition, I think a main key to underscore, I think that is it. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we move on to where we left off. Oh, another very important piece, and we're going to find, we find that this book is broken up in there's like 12 chapters, including the doctor's opinion. There's 11 numbered, with the doctor's opinion is 12, but the last 5 are all about working with others. It's almost half the book, the importance of working with others. But it's in the back part. But we're going to see throughout, even in the very beginning of this thing, even for the second edition, we're going to learn that they're talking about working with others right from the beginning. In the top of page XVII, actually, let me go back to the bottom of XVI. It says, this seemed to prove, after Bill explained to him what he did, gave him the description of alcoholism, explained the problem, and explained the solution that he put into place, right? It says that seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. Well, of course, because if he would have been like Bill and just went to the Oxford group and got from people who are non-alcoholic and got a solution presented to him, well, without knowing the problem, just like with Dr. Bob, that wouldn't have done anything. And if he's like Dr. Bob, where he had the solution and didn't have the problem, that wouldn't have done anything. Before Bill met with Evie, he learned from the doctor he was hopeless. Well, that didn't do anything because he didn't have a solution. But when we put them both together, that's when we have something to work with. And it says here that it proved that one alcoholic working with another could do something that no other human could do with us alcoholics. We could pass on the problem and the solution, and it seemed to work. It says it also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, do not overlook the word strenuous. Strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. I think it was mentioned the only other book we use here other than this is a dictionary, so we understand the words. When it says it's vital for permanent recovery, vital means necessary for life. We want to live, it's going to depend on strenuous work, one alcoholic with another. And this proved that. That's what they're saying. So it goes on to say through the rest of the page, how they worked with another guy, and it says that he recovered immediately. some people picked up the basic ideas in Akron, and some more groups were brought about. And it says, by late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of alcoholism. In other words, they said, man, we got a recipe here that seems to work. Doesn't matter what the background of the alcoholic is. It doesn't matter how much money he has, where he came from. If he's an alcoholic and he applies this into his life, rarely does anyone fail if they thoroughly follow our path. If they do exactly what we're finding, this works every single time. And it was substantiated by they're watching this thing growing, and these people are recovering and staying that way. So now what did they decide? Well, we're only a few groups. How do we get this message, this recipe, out to the world as fast as possible and reach as many people as possible? Well, back then, this is before, people watching television, everybody read. A lot more people in this country read than certainly we do today. So everybody read. So they said, we're going to make a book. Now, there are a couple of reasons for making a book, but that was the main purpose of making the book, is getting this message out. So it says, so where we left off, it says it was now time, the struggling groups thought, to place their message, one, how we got well, and their experience. So they're not just putting out this doctrine of, this is what you need to do to recover. This goes back to what we read on title page. This is what we did to recover. This is based on our experience. This isn't theory or conjecture. This worked for all of us. If you're interested, we'll show you what we did. That goes back into, we don't tell somebody what they have to do. This is what we did. If you're interested, we'll show you what we did. So they wanted to put that in a book. It says this determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had then reached about 100 men and women, and the fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. That means they were having meetings. The society they had, their memberships in their society, they were having meetings. They didn't have a name for their group. They named the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And what is the book? It's the story of how many thousands of men and women had recovered. Well, we're more than 100 men and women. We recovered. What are we going to do at these meetings? We're going to show people how we recovered. We're doing the same thing the book's doing. Should be the same thing. Alcoholics Anonymous. The name Alcoholics Anonymous started with the book, and then the groups took on that name. And I would underline this. The flying blind period ended, and AA entered a new phase in its pioneering time. They had a concrete program. See, when they say that, the flying blind period ended, well, that indicates that there was a flying blind period, right? Because it had to end. Flying blind period is, we're going to try this, we're going to try that, we're going to try all these things and see what works. I'm sure they tried lots and lots of things until they finally said, this is it. It's our concrete program. This seems to work. Rarely does anyone fail when they do this. So this is the program. It's not going to veer from that. It's a concrete program. Flying blind period over. We're going to see in the coming pages how well that concrete program worked out. We'll have a little discussion about that. It says, with the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Ausler, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Remember, it was less than 100 of them. All these guys got jobs, right? Now they got 800 frantic inquiries coming in. I'm sure that they were extremely busy. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found, to the astonishment of everyone, that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. They didn't necessarily have to have meetings. They didn't have to have meetings. They found that they could pass this message of how they recovered through a book, through the mail, into an area of the country that's never heard of Alcoholics Anonymous and probably doesn't have a meeting within 1,000 miles. And somebody could pick this up and read it and learn what they did learned the problem, learned the solution, put it into practice, and they recovered and new groups started just from this book. That is the power of this book. That is why it is essential. It is the core of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. The book was printed in April of 39. So what? 8 months later, it's estimated it went from 100 to 800 recovered alcoholics. That's incredible, just from putting the book out. In the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires, inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. By March of 1941, it's almost, 23 months later, 2 years, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Sound like it's working? Sound like it's working. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. By the close of 1941, so not even 2 years, AA numbered 8,000 members. Sound like it's working? The mushrooming process was in full swing, and AA had become a national institution. Less than 2 years. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. Sounds like there was an essential piece in having a fellowship. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve but never govern, that each group was to be autonomous, and there was to be no professional class of therapy. That's interesting. The first time I had that explained to me when I started studying this, because man, I thought I've been going to AA since I was 14 years old, 20-something years, and then we start studying this. They're talking about there be no professional class of therapy. And I thought, my God, most every AA meeting I go to, it actually looks like a group therapy session. We all talk and explain what we feel and explain what we think and talk about our relationships and blah, 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 blah. And here they're saying that's not what we did. No professional class of therapy. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization, even at our service centers. Our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. Would understand it says here, and we'll be reading about this later, that it was decided that all members ought to be autonomous at the level of press, radio, TV, and film. They didn't say at our meetings. At the level of press, radio, TV, and films are we to be anonymous. I don't know where we got the idea that's all we can use as our first names. I'm not saying that you have to use your last name, but you can. You know, I still go to meetings today. Every once in a while, I'll go to a different meeting, and I introduce myself as Gary Darnell, as a recovered alcoholic. I use my last name. Only because I've been to meetings, and a home group I had at one time, I mean, we had almost 300 people. And when you start talking about somebody, you know, you're talking about, you know, has anybody seen Dick? And he's saying, what Dick? There's like 4 of them. You know, short Dick, you know, Italian, whatever. You're trying to describe. How much easier would it be if you had a man's last name? Right? Right? So there's no need for this anonymous. If you want to be, that's fine. Just understand that this is no hard set rule. Because I've been to meetings that we don't use our last names here. Well, if you choose not to, that's fine, but that's not what AA has to say. It's not how it was founded. If you read and study this book, you will see that. In no circumstance should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies. This was a substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this book. Note that that is not in the first portion of this book. We learned what it's for. It's about how the groups survive, right? But if we want to learn about the program of recovery, if you're new, you're probably more interested in how am I gonna survive than how this AA meeting might survive, right? So the AA recovery program is in the first portion of the book. That's in the second portion. Though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted by 1950, they were confirmed by our first international convention held in Cleveland. Today, the remarkable unity of the AA is one of the greatest assets our society has. While the internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were two principal reasons. Why did we grow by leaps and bounds? Two reasons. One, the large numbers of recoveries, this mushrooming process that they're talking about, it's growing like mad. And two, the reunited homes. Isn't that interesting? Not just talking about people staying sober. We're talking about reunited homes. We're talking about the most difficult things that most of us face when we get here. They're seeing that not only are people recovering, becoming recovered, but their homes are being reunited. Almost every difficulty we're going to learn later was able to be overcome. These made their impressions everywhere. Says here when they started, the next thing they're going to talk about is a little, we talk about this often, this little survey that they did when they came out with the second edition here in 1955, I believe it was written. So like 16 years after the first edition. And it grew so much, they wanted to know, how's this thing working in other parts of it? How's this whole thing working as a whole now? You know, when you only have 3 groups, it's kind of easy to count how many people are there, but now you've got thousands of groups, and how's this working out? So they did a little survey. And let's look at what they found in that survey. They say of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. Half. 25% sobered up after some relapses. And among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. That, when I first read that, was astounding to me. They're saying at that time, this book had been moving around for 16 years. When new people came, see, I could relate to this because I had been in AA for a while, so I saw new people come. Some of you have seen new people come. Lots of new, if you've been around, you've seen new people come and you've seen new people go. And I would compare to what they saw then to what we see today. Back then, they're saying that at minimum, what we're reading here, at minimum, 75% of people recovered. Might have relapsed a couple of times, but 75% of them came, maybe went out a couple of times, but came back and stayed. And I ask you, when you go to meetings, other meetings that you attend, when you see somebody new come in, is it about 75% of them that end up staying? There are a couple smirks, see a couple smirks with that. 75, how 50%?
Yeah.
How about 25? I don't know what the number is, but, and I don't really want to give my opinion, but
Less than 10.
I think that Tom will give his opinion is less than 10. But I think as a whole, we've discussed this before and it's pretty darn low. Pretty darn low. So my question with that right here is, why was it so high then? And why is it so low now? We have the same program. What's different? And the only thing that I've been able to see that's different is when we go back to that previous page, a couple of pages back, and page XBII, said when they put this book out, the flying blind period ended. Concrete program. We're not flying blind anymore. So what were they doing at those meetings for those 16 years? When they sat at those meetings, they're taking this book and they're doing exactly what we're sitting here today. We're teaching people how we recover. We're not giving our opinions. We're not talking about our feelings. We're not talking about my dog died. None of that. No therapy. If you're interested, we're going to show you how we don't have new people sitting, whining and complaining. If you're hurting bad enough, we're going to show you a solution. If you don't want it, you can leave. That's all we're here for, is to offer you a solution. We're not wasting time here for anything else. That's what they were doing. And there's, proofs in the pudding, 75%. How many meetings do you go to any that have gone to other meetings where you're doing this like we're doing here. Not too many, probably less than 10% as well.
This protocol is not practiced anywhere I know.
So it's pretty low. So we got a low amount of people who come and stay, and we got a low amount of meetings that are studying this book. Do we see a correlation there? That's why we doing what we're doing. That's why this meeting is called 1939 AA. We're trying to practice exactly what they did then so that we can get the same results that they were getting then. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So we're getting to the end of this here.
Where you at?
I'm back on page XX. And just before the first full paragraph says, other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program. But great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. Why do you think they came and they decided they didn't want it? Well, it seems to me they probably came to the meeting and we're teaching them, whoa, I'm changed my life. You know, trusting somebody else and tell them all my dirt and going back and making amends. Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know. No, thanks. We're going to pass on that. But it says a great number of them, 2 out of 3 came back. Why would that be? Why would they come back if they didn't want anything to do it? Think it got a little more painful out there? You think they might say, well, this is what you guys have to, I'm just going to have to try. I'm going to try harder than I ever had before to try to control this deal. And 2 out of 3 of them came back. It doesn't say the other third ended up controlling it. You have to wonder how many of those actually died in the process of trying. The real alcoholics, you know, that's the great thing here. We offer this way of life. We will learn through case studies in the first portion of this book of people who found it dramatic proposals. They say a price has to be paid. Like, it's a big deal living this way of life. You're asking us to change the way we think and feel about everything. Right? Change the way we live completely. That's a serious deal. The only thing that's going to push us to do that is the same thing that pushed Bill and Bob. And that is, one, understanding it's a hopeless condition. But I think even more importantly, the second part of what we see in step 1. Your life become unmanageable enough where you've had enough pain. It tells us in here that alcohol becomes the great persuader. You know, the first step is practiced out there, not in here. Get out there and try to control it. When you've had enough pain and you've tried every resource you can to get well and it doesn't work, come in here, you're going to have a bit of willingness. So the ones that came and left, they weren't willing enough. Dr. Bob wasn't. Says he didn't put this into practice. He tried the Oxford group principles, but not to the extent that he knew he needed to when he realized he was hopeless. When Bill explained the doctor's opinion. So that's something we can't do with a newcomer. We can't bring them to that point. We can't convince, you need to do this. You need to get it. We can't do that. Their pain level and where their bottom is completely different for everybody. It's just, when do you realize I've had enough? That's what brings us around. Goes on to say another reason for this wide acceptance of AA was the ministration of friends in medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization, nor does AA take any particular medical point of view. I think it's pretty important to point out to newcomers as well. AA is not a religious organization. They may not know that when they get here, but lo and behold, it's, you know, they can certainly get that impression when 99% of AA meetings are held in a church, right? We need to point that out. It's not a religious organization. We don't take any particular point of view, though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as the men of religion. Alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America and in distant lands. The same democratic evening up process is now going on. By personal religious affiliation, we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 15% of us are women. That was at that time. At present, 1955, our membership is pyramiding at the rate of about 20% a year. So far upon the total problem of several million actual or potential alcoholics in the world, we've made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcoholic problem and all its ramifications. Upon therapy, there's that word again, for the alcoholic himself, we have no monopoly. Yet it is our great hope that those newcomers that have yet to find, who have as yet found no answer, may begin to find one in the pages of this book and will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom. So those who come here who have not found an answer, where are they saying we hope that they'll find the answer? Is it in the meeting? It says in the book, where we hope you can find an answer. So I think with that, we're not going to do anything in the third or fourth forwards. There's not really much in there to cover that we find pertinent, but I'm hoping that we got out of this anyways, including the opening readings, how important this book is. I mean, this is the solution for alcoholism. The directions for that is in here. If we don't have this book out and we're not studying it, doesn't that put us where they were before they had the book, which was called what? The flying blind period, right? We don't want to be in the flying blind period. Facts have already proven that we're not getting the same results in the flying blind period as they got when the flying blind period ended. So with that, I also want to say, if anybody here is new or newer or not and don't have a book, we do have them for sale at our cost. What is it, like $10, I think, something like that?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. So $11, inflation.
Correction.
All right. So if anybody needs a book, let us know after meeting. If you can't afford a book, come see me after the meeting. All right. Does anybody have any questions on any of that we had read? No? I think the only other thing that I would point out here is if you go to pay the last 4th edition XXIV, there is a little statement in that first paragraph that is also kind of reiterates what we just talked about. It says, while our literature has preserved the integrity of the AA message, why they wrote it down, to preserve the integrity so it's not changed. There has been sweeping changes in society as a whole, and they're reflected in new customs and practices within the fellowship. That's what they saw in 55. It seems that those new customs and practices, one of them being putting away this book, may have done innumerable harm to God knows how many people. Kept me sick for a long time, going to AA for many, many years. Talked to countless people that had the same thing. Going to AA for sober for years. Sober for over a decade. Sober. Was able to get sober. Just going to meetings, doing service work, things like that. Things that they told me this is what you need to do. Stick with the winner. Keep coming back. Going to meetings. That's what I did. And I stayed sober. But my God, did I get miserable. My God, did I get miserable. And isn't that really the reason we came here to begin with? I don't think I've met any alcoholic that in talking about this, you think, oh, I'm coming here because I want to get sober. I didn't want to get sober when I came here. I liked drinking. I just didn't like what happened, afterwards. But I liked drinking. I couldn't stand being sober. I was miserable when I was sober. That's why sober, they're telling us, have you read the word sober yet? Sober is not the solution in Alcoholics Anonymous. Sober is defined as not drunk. That's it. If I was the same person and had the same things going on in my life, let me tell you this. If I was not drunk, and I wasn't for many years, I didn't have a reunited home. I did not have reunited relationships with my children. None of that happened out of just being sober. That didn't happen until I started actually doing some things and become recovered. So that's how this works, and that's what their message is. Should we start the doctor's opinion?
Why not?
Okay, why don't we just start on the doctor's opinion? Again, the doctor's opinion makes up 7 1/4 pages. And, I had been taught, and this is what I do with newcomers. It's not in this book, although it does indicate that we read the book and study the book, in understanding what we just read about how essential it was for Bill to learn from Dr. Silkworth about this grave nature of alcoholism. and how crucial it was for Dr. Bob, or he was unable to recover without that information. It's probably just as important for us to know it and learn it. So generally, when I work with a newcomer, same thing that I went through, it's to read this 30 days in a row. If you miss a day, start over. Read it 30 days in a row. Does two things. Number one, I've not found any other thing in any other book, including in this book, that explains what is wrong with me. What makes me an alcoholic is what's in the 7 1/4 pages. And that is crucial to understand. You're reading that 30 days in a row, hopefully you're going to pick up a lot from it. Number two, if you're working with a new guy, if he ain't willing to read this 30 days in a row, do you think he's going to be willing to do the rest of this? You know, you want to put it to the litmus test, because how many times have we may have even said it? I mean, we know we know the BS, we know the game. And you know, you get a new guy, oh man, I love what we had to say, man, I'm willing to do anything, man, I'll do whatever I got to do. Why don't you read this? You know, we're going to read this 30 days in a row. And why don't you read it for the next 7 days and meet me back here at the meeting next week and we'll discuss what you read. At least half the time they don't show up at the meeting next time. And at least half of those, if not more, that may show up the next time. Oh, they never read the book, didn't have time. Man, I was busy. But this is the most important thing. Yeah, watching the feet. We know the game. And it's not to demean somebody, but understand if you have this message and able to save somebody's life, don't waste it on somebody who is not willing to do this, because you're not going to be able to convince them. And I'm not just saying it, we're going to learn that when we get into the back portion of this book. That's the deal. So we're going to get into the doctor's opinion now, and we'll be studying this probably even 7 1/4 pages, probably take us at least a couple of weeks to get through, because we're going to go through it slowly. So let's just start. It says on page XXV, we of Alcoholics Anonymous. So when they say we of Alcoholics Anonymous, who are they talking about? Remember when they wrote the book, there was no group called Alcoholics Anonymous. It's the book. So they're saying we of this book, right? That was the more than 100 men and women that this book passed through before it got printed. Says that they believe that the reader is going to be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. In other words, you're sick. We're saying, you think you're an alcoholic, read this book. They started thinking, what's the first thing somebody's going to want to know? The same thing Bill did. Where did Bill go when he realized he had a problem? He went to the hospital. He was fortunate enough to be able to go to the most prominent hospitals in the world that specialize in alcohol and drug addiction, right? You're going to go to a doctor, see what they can offer us. So we believe the reader is going to be interested in that because they were interested in that. It's the first place we go. What can you do? You got a pill for this, doc? What can we do to get me well? What's wrong with me? Right? So they're saying you're going to be interested in that. So they also decided, well, who are we going to get to write this? Who's going to tell us about this alcoholism and what the medical fraternity has to offer, number one, and two, what do they think about what we're doing? So that testimony, convincing testimony, must surely come from medical men who has two qualifications. One, they've had experience with our sufferings. They've seen us sick. And two, they've witnessed these guys here return to health. We couldn't do anything for them and they returned. That's who we want to hear from. They're going to understand how this thing works. So who did they pick? It says, here's the qualification. This guy is a well-known doctor. Number two, he is the chief physician. That's the top guy, right? Chief physician of a nationally prominent hospital. Think about how big a hospital is. The head guy there, right? Well-known guy. And you know what they did at this hospital? It wasn't like a treatment center that you got 30, 50 people in there. This is a hospital. And at that time, they specialized in alcohol and drug addiction. Thousands of people. That's who they got. You think somebody who's seen thousands of people come and go every year might know a little something about alcoholism? That's all they specialize in? Sounds like they picked the right guy. It says, oh, wait a minute. We missed something here. It says he was the chief physician of this nationally prominent hospital that specialized in alcohol. And what else does it say? Drug addiction. Thought this is Alcoholics Anonymous. We're talking about drug addiction. I've gone to NA meetings. Oh, this is kind of like A, but this is completely different. Completely different. The interesting thing is I've been to a lot of those other anonymous programs, not just to check and see how they're doing or what they're doing, because I've got numerous issues, okay, with addiction. And going to them, oh, this is very different. I don't care, you've been doing this for 20, this is different. And it just dawned on me, my God, how different could it be when you have the same solution? You know? And in here, they're saying it's the same, it's the same problem. What we're gonna read in this book, what I'm getting at, is it's alcohol or it's drug, that's the this is about addiction. And when we get into reading in this doctor's opinion of how the doctor will go into very detailed explanation on how our cycle works for every addiction, they all work the same. It doesn't matter if it was drugs, it doesn't matter if it was alcohol, sex, gambling, or anything else. All these addictions work the same as what we're going to read. And I say that, if you're a drug addict or you know somebody who's a drug, our meeting, it was mentioned in the beginning, is open to anyone or everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. And most importantly, this information that we have here, these directions are to recover from addiction, be it alcohol addiction, drug addiction, any addiction. Okay. And I think with that first paragraph, I think I'm going to stop right there.